Welcome to this webinar. This is called There's a Hole in My Bucket, Addressing Water and Sanitation Utilities Growing Liquidity Challenges to Ensure Services Through the Coronavirus Pandemic. My name is Julie Perkins. I'm the officer in charge for GWOPA, program of UN Habitat dedicated to knowledge sharing and learning between water utilities. This is the fifth in a series of webinars that we have been organizing with our partner organizations, and we're happy today to be doing this one with GIZ. These various, we've been dealing with various topics related to water and sanitation service provision related to COVID-19. Before we begin, a few technical notes, housekeeping issues. If you are not familiar with Zoom, please note a few things. We have interpretation for this webinar in French and Spanish, which you can find by clicking on the globe sign at the bottom of your screen. And I recommend that unless you master all three of those languages, then you click on interpretation, because there will be presentations in French and Spanish as well as English. We ask you to ask any questions in the question and answer tab, which is also located at the bottom of your webinar screen. For any technical challenges or questions that you have, you can send us messages directly through the chat box to our administrator. You can either ask them directly, or you can send them directly to the administrator. And finally, throughout the webinar, we're going to be using Mentimeter, which is a tool that you may be familiar with. It's very simple to use, and it just helps us in getting a little bit more audience participation. So you simply go to the website menti.com, and at the time that we ask the question, our moderator will give you the code. You enter the code, and then there'll be a number of questions that you will be asked, and you can just enter your response, and together we will watch the live responses appear on the screen. So just be prepared for that exciting moment. We have an excellent program for today. I'll just give you a quick overview before introducing you to our moderator. We have, we will be having a keynote speech from the World Bank. We're happy to have Midori Makino here as the lead water supply and sanitation specialist from the World Bank, who will be introducing us to two financial tools that the practice has developed there to help utilities deal with the financial challenges around the COVID crisis. And then we'll be having a panel of operators and utility associations from different parts of the world, from Europe, from Latin America, Africa, and the MENA region. Following their short presentations, we'll have about half an hour for discussion, during which you're highly encouraged to put your questions into the question and answer box and interact as much as possible with the audience. With no further ado, let me introduce you to our moderator. And we're really happy to have Dieter Rottenberger, who is the head of GIZ's sector program, Sustainability Water Policy, Innovations for Resilience. GIZ is the lead partner, as I mentioned, for this webinar. And Dieter's an ecological economist who has more than 20 years of experience and very strong familiarity with the issues at hand. He's worked for utilities, German multi-utility company, as well as research institutions and financial institutions with the Swiss in Switzerland. He has been with GIZ for over 13 years, and he's worked in many countries around the world, including Europe and MENA region, Africa, and the Caribbean. So happy to have you as our moderator. Dieter, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Julie, for the warm welcome and for the introduction words. And thank you, of course, to our keynote speaker, our panelists, and to you in the audience, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us here today. And since we, of course, are keen to know who is in and where do you come from, we've got actually our first Mentimeter question for you. So this is a test run, if you want. It's a simple thing. It's the question of what city and country are you from? So if you want to participate in that in that survey, then go to www.menti.com, so menti.com, and use the code 763823. And we see already the first people entering their locations: Lebanon, Philippines, we see UK, Braunschweig, a city in Germany, Kampala, Bonn. Yeah, okay, so we see Jordan. Of course, I'm very happy to see Jordan there as well, having lived there for 6 years. Lebanon, Cologne, so we nicely developing. Well, I can see at the moment a strong presence in the Middle East, so with Lebanon, with Jordan. We also have Morocco, obviously. I see India, Tokyo. I see Africa, of course. We've got Lusaka, we've got Kampala. Cote d'Ivoire is with us. Also Morocco, Rabat. I can see in Latin America, I see Peru, Buenos Aires in Argentina, the US, Canada, so very, very international. It's great, and I can imagine that, of course, given the different time zones we are working with, that for some it might be towards the end of the day, for the others it's rather the start of the day. So we'll try to get you through this webinar in whatever time zone you are, so that you have a feeling that it was a great start of the day or a great end of the day. So thank you very much for that overview. So on behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, or short the BMZ, as well as the GIZ sector program on water policy, innovation for resilience, I'm very pleased to welcome you to this 5th session of our joint webinar series on utilities fight COVID-19. Joint meaning that's GWOPA and GIZ jointly organizing and doing it. We started that webinar series because we are convinced that utilities are key actors when it comes to fight the COVID-19 in the respective countries and the respective cities. As we all know, that the resilience against the pandemic is directly linked to safe water and sanitation services. So definitely water utilities, operators providing water and sanitation services are key actors in this regard. However, despite that important role the water operators are having, they also face severe challenges, in particular also financial challenges, caused by twofold burden of first increasing costs and secondly decreasing revenues. So while many utilities already struggle to maintain the service that provides safely managed water and sanitation for all, they also have to face now, given also the COVID-19 pandemic, an economic downturn in low to middle income countries, also in higher income countries. And this is leading to high public debt levels, which again then has direct impact on the capacity of governments, of national institutions, and of the utilities themselves to finance and allocate the very scarce resources for the water supply and sanitation sector. So this session, and I'm very happy actually to have that session taking place today, is very close to my heart as an environmental economist, and which has worked and has been dealing with the very important terms like finance, cost, expenditure, efficiency, and these terms have kind of accompanied my career in the last 20 years. So I'm very happy to see that we deal with a very crucial topic of finance in this webinar. And we have brought together experts in this field to hear about the outlooks on the solvency, financial solvency, solutions when it comes to the difficulties, the challenges with regard to the financial solvency and liquidity, but also maybe the question of how improved cooperation between different players can help to overcome some of these challenges. Once again, thank you to our speakers. Thank you to you as the audience for being here to share also your views, your questions with us. I really do look forward to the next 90 minutes and hopefully very fruitful discussions in utility finance in COVID-19 times. So with that introduction, I would like to welcome Midori Makino, lead water supply and sanitation specialist for the water global practice of the World Bank. She's based in Washington, DC, has over 20 years of experience working across water and infrastructure sectors in Latin America, the Caribbean, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South Asia regions. So basically everywhere the people from today come from, our audience from today comes from, she has been working on. And she has led investment operations and analytical works in several countries in these regions. She has also held positions in the independent evaluation group as the manager of sustainable development. And her areas of expertise include infrastructure, finance, policy, and institutional reforms, and also the evaluation of development effectiveness. Midori is a Japanese national and holds an MBA from the MIT and a Master of Science in Economics from the Stockholm School of Economics. Midori, we highly appreciate that you made yourself available for this session today, and the floor is yours for your presentation.
Thank you very much for your introduction, and good morning, and for me, but over there must be, in many countries, it must be afternoon or even evening. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I am, as introduced, Midori Makino. I work for the World Bank, currently in the LAC region, but yes, I have been working across different regions and different countries. I would like to use my slide. Yes, thank you. So could we go to the next one? Yes, please. So this is the agenda for my presentation. There are 3 parts. I'll first be talking about the context and overview of the World Bank's support to the water utilities during the COVID-19. Then I would like to give you a brief overview of these 2 tools that we have developed. This is something we've done. That's something I've been doing. It's keeping me busy now the past 4 or 5 months, or even longer. Since March or April, we have been exploring different possibilities to help our clients. These are both demand driven. There's been high demand from many of our client utilities to have such tools available for them. So these are both available at the in the World Bank's website, and I will be providing the link to the website at the end of my presentation so that you could access them and download them. Next slide, please. Yes, so here I would like to start with a context and overview. This slide illustrates the context I believe many of you are familiar with. And as the moderator also introduced, there are a lot of, at the beginning of the pandemic, there are a lot of emergency measures that were taken by different countries, different utilities. And those are both on the revenue side as well as the cost side. To just give you an example, and at the World Bank, we've also prepared like a geographic image of where different measures have been implemented as well that we could track. For example, there have been suspension of service disconnections due to lack of payment. There have been utility payments waived by the government or water provided for free to lower income consumers. At the minimum, they've been deferred for up to several years. Water tariff increases has been suspended. And in many countries, there have been, on the operating cost side and the capital expenditures, there have been measures taken such as increase in protective supplies for the staff of the utilities. There's been also use of tankers to supply water to the underserved areas. There have been more bottled water and compact water treatment plants made available to the hospitals. There have been mandatory reconnection of the disconnected services. There have been residual chlorine use and also urgent rehabilitation programs being implemented. So the cost has also gone up. As a result of these emergency response measures, we've seen tariff revenue collections being hit. The shortfall is at least 20 to 40% in the utilities that I've analyzed, but sometimes up to 70 or 80% of the collection has been declined, right? So they've lost 80% of the revenues basically in some month following COVID. So such lower revenue collection, higher operating costs, increasing expenditures to extend or improve the services at the same time as facing the pressure to make debt and other debt obligations. This has really put the cash flow constraint. This has really made the cash problems worse for the water service providers. Next slide, please. We have therefore responded with these two tools. As I said, these are available online. The tools were supported by with funding from GWSP. It stands for Global Water Security and Sanitation Partnership. If you haven't heard of them, this is one of the largest think tanks dedicated to the water in the world. And our donors are the major global partners of the World Bank that are contributing to reaching universal access of water and sanitation. So these are not the only tools that the World Bank provides. Of course, there are many other ongoing activities that we are working on. They're global initiatives as follows. Here at the bottom, I've laid out some of the other parallel activities going on, including the Utility of the Future exercise, policy, institution, and regulation initiative in order to create an enabling environment for the countries to improve their performance for the sector. We have another one called the Citywide Inclusive Sanitation, as well as the Circular Economy and Resilience Initiative. So these are all the ongoing parallel initiatives. We have case studies, we have selected countries and cities to focus on, and the summary of the results will be available also online very soon on our website. Next, please. Okay. So objective of this first tool that I would like to present is to help the water service providers to quantify COVID's financial impact on their cash flows. So why do we do this? This is in order to articulate and demonstrate the financing gap associated with the pandemic, and to justify claim for additional resources to ensure that the water will continue to flow to the customers, but also to ensure sustainability and resilience of these water services and the utilities. And these additional resources that that could be tapped could be publicly available, through government, or private financing, depending on the context of the utility. If they have capacity to raise funding through commercial financing, for example. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about the other tool on the financing facility. The model that we have developed is simple, and it's going to be for the purpose of wider use. The only equipment you need is Microsoft Excel. So you just download it and you start using it. It's short term. It's 12 months to assess the impact on the COVID. This could be extended. You could be using it for the following year as well, if this continues. The intent of the tool is not to replace an existing model. If the water service providers they're already using financial models that could play this role, by all means, you should continue to use it. It's not to replace any other tool. We have prepared two tools. One is the regular model and another one is simplified. So this is more to try to make a generic one so that as many utilities as possible could easily download and start using them. To do that, we have also translated the model, the simplified model, into other languages, including Spanish, French, and Portuguese. There's also, we try to make it user-friendly, so color code the blue cells as the input cell and the black cells as the formula cells, so that it could be easily identify what information to put in. So in the next slide, I would like to show you just the principles applied to the tool. So this is kind of basic, but just to remind you, revenues are sourced from water sales, sewage sales, connection revenue, and other revenues. Operating costs are consisting of salaries, water extraction, electricity, chemicals, and so on. These are the standard the income statement items. Then we have the working capital requirements, debt service obligations that are fulfilled. We assume that these obligations are fulfilled only through the internally generated funds before the new investments or loan obligations are considered. And finally, we're applying the accrual accounting, so it includes the three statements: the income statement, balance sheet, as well as the cash flow statement. Next slide, please. There's 3 steps involved with this use of this tool. The first one is to prepare a baseline projection. So this is assuming normal operation without COVID. The second step is to prepare the impact assessment of COVID. So the likelihood of affecting certain operations and finances. The third step is quite important. It is to use the results and prepare an emergency response plan designed to minimize the cash flow gap. Next, please. Yes, so I won't be reading all of these items here, which are the input cells, basically. So what the kind of information you need is just to give you an example of things that you will need to put in, right? So we'll have this for the regular version. We have separate cells, baseline, COVID impact assessment, 4 or 5, 6 cells, not the cells, the worksheets in the Excel that you need to put information on, which all in the big box you have all the inputs, and then this will basically calculate in the summary sheet the results of the COVID financial impact. And I would later like to show you just one snapshot of how this model looks like in Excel. So maybe the next slide, I will quickly go through how the simplified version looks. So here, the simplified version has 2 worksheets. Basically, the assumption worksheet on the revenue cost build-up, and then we have the impact assessment worksheet. So the number of inputs that you require on a monthly basis to build up this worksheet is less. It's compared to the regular model. And I, rather than to go through all this in detail, I believe that my presentation could be made available. So you could go through these later to see whether you have the data required to fill the model. But yes, if you could go to the next one, I'll give you the very quick snapshot of how the actual model looks like. So the regular version has the income statement, cash flow, and balance sheet, and this is the summary 1 page, which shows you on a monthly basis how the financing the financial health of the company or the water utility has been deteriorating, and you add everything up, the cumulative number at the very right side. You can see this green, circle, thank you, where you can see this is an example of one of the utilities, but it's a heavy debt situation, right? It's very negative. So this is a visual image of how you can show that the COVID is giving a very severe impact on the utility. So if you could look at the next one, which is the light, the simplified version. Similarly, we show you how the summary sheet would illustrate the scale of the impact. Plus, we also include a graph where you can see visually with colors, you know, what's gone up and what's gone down, and what's gone up is in the blue color is actually the cost. So cost is going up, and then the revenues are going down, and then finally cash is going down. So this is something you could, you know, a utility could also show, bring to the lenders to ask for funding with this evidence. At this stage, I want to also remind you the importance of doing simulations. So not just this one, but for the utilities that I have been working with, we've gone through, you know, with a client, we've been talking about different scenarios, the likelihood of things deteriorating, looking at key performance indicators, key efficiency indicators, and so on. And in the emergency response plan, it's quite important that we also lay out different options of what could be done to improve the situation. So one of the things that I have noticed with the utilities I've been working with is that it's not only the liquidity part that's required, right? Initially, we started off this, when we developed this model, we were very concerned about the short-term liquidity gap. But as it turns out, many utilities actually did have some good contingency funding or some, you know, savings to deal with that emergency expenses. But what happened was that they had to defer CapEx, you know, whatever they were planning, they had to defer it. So that gives a longer term impact on the sustainability of the utilities, and as well as the goals that the country wanted to achieve. If they had, you know, universal access by a certain year, that may have to be delayed, right? So these are the factors that need to be communicated back to the government. And this would also maybe facilitate additional, you know, subsidies or financing from the government. One of the, so I was here, up to here, I was talking more from the utility point of view, but now let's shift gears to talk about the next tool, which we developed more with the view of the government. You know, how do we then, now that we know the scale of the impact on the utilities cash, how can the governments then help to inject cash or disperse funding to help these utilities to improve their financial health? So now I would like to shift gears to talk about the financing facility paper. Please, so in the next, yes, thank you. The objective of the financial facility paper, it's a working paper that we have developed, is to lay out the options and considerations in designing a facility where we could put funding to disperse to the utilities in need of financing. So the audience that we had in mind is the government, the policymakers that are considering to how can we help these utilities. I want to stress the urgency of this action, because even, as I said, even if the liquidity itself is not the major issue, deferred maintenance, deferred CapEx, you know, deferred restructuring of the debt obligation, restructuring of you know, other payment plans, it's all going to affect the utility in the medium to longer term. So the sooner the better to deal with this problem. And finally, I wanted to focus on options rather than concrete recommendations, because this will depend mostly on local context. For example, scale of the pandemic, state of the local finances, institution arrangements, and the capacity of the country. It all depends on the local context. So I'm not giving, you know, this is it has to be debt, it has to be grant, it has to be loan. These all depend on the local context. So the next step would be for the policymakers to apply these options to the local context. Next, please. This is a snapshot. I wanted to illustrate the key considerations, the key principles that you would need to consider in considering to establish such a financing facility. So broadly speaking, there are 3 buckets. You can see here at the far left side, sources of financing for the facility. And then you have the second bucket, which is institutional arrangements. And then the third bucket would be the modalities and conditions for disbursement to the utilities. So I'll go through one by one here. So in terms of the sources of financing, the first thing we did was to assess the scale of the impact. So now that we have more or less how much money we would require for each utility, we would need to find where do we get the money from. So as I was saying earlier, it could be publicly available from the government, or it could be loan from IMF, it could be loan from World Bank or other multilateral development banks. It could also be, if the utilities are in a little better financial shape, they could also access maybe publicly available funding. Private funding through commercial market or bonds. Secondly, in terms of the institutional arrangements, we would first need to identify the facility manager, right? Who is going to hold the money and who is going to disperse the money? Who's going to review the applications coming from the utilities and to do the disbursement? So here, there are other considerations as well, because would it be a national level facility, or would it be a regional level or the sub-regional level? These are different things to consider. Would it be a water only facility, or should it be an infrastructure facility to have to make eligibility open to any utility? It could be an energy utility, or it could be maybe even a transport authority could access. So multi-sectoral, we're considering some of the multi-sectoral facilities in the Latin America region as well. So I'm saying these could be different options. With regards to where to house the facility, it could be in the government itself, the Ministry of Finance or the line ministry, or it could be outsourced to a commercial bank, or it could be also done in a national development bank. That's the second consideration. The third bucket is the modalities and conditions of disbursement. So this could be have these sub categories. The first one is, would it be, what form would it take? Would it be a grant to given to the utilities, or would it be a loan? In which case, what will be the terms and conditions of such a loan? Would it be a hybrid model? Right? So there are different things to consider. In terms of the actual amount, how much should we give to each utility? Should it be equal to the reduction in cash flow caused by the pandemic, or should it be equal to funds needed to keep the operation going, or only limited to essential expenditure? So it also depends on, again, it's really important to go back to look at the scale of the facility and availability of the funding in order to limit the funding to help as many utilities as possible. Would it be focusing on areas of low coverage? Would it be focusing on the areas of the larger pandemic impact? Right, there's a lot to consider. With regard to the condition on disbursement, we could also consider, does it have to be a legally incorporated utility, or how about the informal service providers? Could they be eligible? So how do we need to show the pandemic is reduced? Such a financial tool that I earlier showed you, such a visual image of what the evidence of the impact, would that be sufficient, or do they need more detailed documentation? Should there be restriction on the use of the funds, right? Finally, promoting reforms. By this, I mean, should we just give the financing and end at that, or should we maybe link it to a longer term reform plans for the utilities. For example, should it be like a 2-tranche disbursement? You know, you give first tranche to just do the quick, you know, liquidity funding gap. And then the following one could be linked to something like energy efficiency plans or non-revenue water reduction. If the operations are improved, you know, you reward the utilities that are improving their operations, right, in the middle to longer run. So these are different things that to consider. You know, this is quite loaded slide. But finally, in the next slide, I just want to show you, it's a similar slide. You know, all the pretty much what I showed you earlier here. What I wanted to draw your attention is here at the bottom. There are also other, we need to see this in a holistic manner. So maybe there are parallel ongoing activities, maybe a social welfare programs or government programs that are giving money directly to the households to pay for their water bills. So if such schemes exist, then maybe you don't need to give as much to the utility for the, at least to cover the revenues, right? Because the revenue will be collected from the households. So they are supposed to be collected if, you know, the households are receiving other means, other financial support. So this type of holistic, you know, also the attention to the regulator and the role of the regulator could be important. In some countries where they have a strong regulator, they could maybe play the role of the facility manager as well. So these are, you know, food for thought for you to consider when you consider the establishment of a financial facility. Finally, in the last slide, I hope I'm not running over too much, just to show you where you can access these two tools. It's as I said, the both tools have been funded by the Water and the Global Water Security and Sanitation Partnership. So on this website, you can find blogs, you can find the other tools that I was mentioning, and they're easily downloadable often in many different languages as well. So I would encourage you to visit our site, and I would be available to take any questions you may have. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Midori, for that presentation, highlighting the World Bank tools and also, I think, some food for thought with regard to setting up financial facilities. So just as a reminder, we're happy to collect questions you might have as an audience for Midori for her presentation, and we'll have the discussion of these questions then after the panel discussion, which will follow in 1 minute. Also, another reminder: the presentation itself will be made available at the GWOPA website and platform. So this will be available to all participants and all people in the audience. Before coming to the panel discussion, I'd like to have to pose another question to you, another Mentimeter question, a survey. And maybe we can have that question on the screen. So the question is, what are the biggest financial challenges for water and sanitation operators? And there you see 7 options. You can do a ranking from increasing costs due to service provision expansion, limited cash reserves, and so on. So again, please go to menti.com, use the code, and give us your ranking on what, from your perspectives, are the biggest financial challenges the water and sanitation operators are facing due to COVID-19. So happy to see you. There you go. Started already. Okay, we saw some changes in the past seconds between the cash reserves and the falling demand due to the inability of customers to pay their bills. Okay, it looks like the picture is relatively stable now. So as you can see, limited cash reserves have made the pole position. We have then the falling demand due to the inability of customers to pay their bills. So which is of course two sides. It's the demand side, but also again, of course, obviously an income component of it. We have the cost of critical supplies, which are rising. The industrial demand, which also is a major contributor to falling revenues, then on the fourth position. The service provision expansion on number 5. And then the increasing cost to the operations, remote working, PPE, and so on, as number 6. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Let's start now with our panel discussion. The panelists have been quickly introduced already by Julie at the beginning. So I'm happy to welcome Mr. Muntasir Salah Eddine. He is the General Manager, CEO of Radima, the Marrakesh water utility. And he has he's a state engineer in electrical engineering and power electronics, and has a master also in service marketing. He started his career at Radima already in 1993 as an electrical engineer, has then been in charge also for some 6 years as director of operations, dealing with electricity operations, drinking water exploitation, and the operation of the wastewater treatment plant, amongst others. And since 2019, he's the acting chief executive officer of Radima. We have then also as a panelist, Mr. Milo Fiasconaro. He is the executive director of the Aqua Publica Europea, so in Europe, which is a European Association of Public Water Operators. And he has been in this position since 2012. And prior to that, he has worked with public authorities in the implementation of European policies. He has extensive experience in EU policies, especially in the field of innovation and environmental policies. We are also happy that Mrs. Valeria Suarez has been able to join us. She is in charge of the Water Operators Partnership LAC Secretariat at Aguas y Saneamientos Argentinos. So their water and wastewater in Argentina association. She has been working together with the IDB and GWOPA Human Habitat since 2016. And previously she was a consultant for IDB, Emerging Sustainable Cities Initiatives. She has a degree in business administration from the Universidad in Católica Argentina. And then I'm also happy to have Mr. Jonathan Campata with us. He is the managing director of Lusaka Water Supply and Sanitation Company, with 28 years of experience working at operational and management levels in the water sector. His responsibilities include strategic leadership of the water utility, and that includes the reliable and safe water supply and sanitation services to Lusaka and 6 other urban and peri-urban areas in the Lusaka province. Jonathan is a civil engineer by trade and specialized in water resources engineering. So this is our panel, and I would like to invite our first panelist, Mr. Muntasir Salah Eddine, for the presentation and for his first initial statements on the topic how COVID-19 has affected his utility on the financial side. Thank you very much.
Merci tout le monde. Donc, je suis fier d'être parmi vous dans ce webinaire qui concerne les impacts du Covid sur la distribution potable et l'assainissement. Donc, je représente l'ARADEMA, qui est la régie autonome de distribution d'eau et d'électricité dans la ville de Marrakech, la ville ocre au Maroc. Donc, pour nous, pendant cette période, la priorité d'abord, c'était de prendre toutes les dispositions nécessaires pour la non-propagation de cette épidémie au niveau de notre ville et de notre pays. Donc, la priorité, c'est préserver la santé de notre collaborateur et d'essayer de préserver aussi celle de nos clients et nos partenaires. Donc, comme vous savez, nous gérons un secteur qui est primordial et qui est très sensible. Donc, ça concerne la distribution de l'eau avec toute la qualité requise. En plus, pour nous, c'est la distribution aussi de l'électricité avec toutes les contraintes devenues pour le télétravail, la télééducation, donc une qualité de service qui doit être très assurée. Donc, pour nous aussi, nous avons été aussi touchés par cette pandémie relative à nos recettes. Donc, les recettes ont diminué et cela a été impacté par deux facteurs. D'abord, les paiements par les clients qui ont été minimisés, en plus aussi du chiffre d'affaires qui a été touché. Donc, comme vous connaissez, la ville de Marrakech, c'est une ville touristique. Et vu que cette pandémie a touché ce secteur mondialement, donc nous avons été aussi touchés par cette pandémie relativement à notre chiffre d'affaires. Mais l'État a donné priorité à ce que la qualité du service doit être assurée 24 heures sur 24 et pour tout le monde. Donc la régie a été sensibilisée dans ce sens et nous avons employé tous les efforts pour garantir la continuité de service. En parallèle, nous devons aussi garantir notre équilibre financier pour assurer ces services-là. Donc pour cela, l'intervention de la régie, en plus de tous les tutelles, c'est-à-dire les administrations publiques auxquelles nous sommes soumis, donc employer plusieurs efforts dans ce sens. D'abord, relativement au paiement de nos clients, donc les clients représentent plusieurs catégories. Donc il y a les clients administratifs, les grands clients consommateurs, les industriels, les hôteliers, etc. Et aussi la grande marge qui est les clients particuliers. Donc pour chaque catégorie de clients, des dispositions ont été prises. Donc l'État a encouragé les administrations à faire leur paiement dans les délais pour nous assurer notre équilibre financier. Pour les autres utilisateurs, les grands clients, donc l'État aussi les a encouragés par des crédits qui sont spécialisés pour assurer l'exploitation, le paiement de leurs salariés, ainsi que le paiement de leurs frais relatifs à leur consommation. Pour les clients particuliers, donc, nous avons eu plusieurs étapes et nous avons permis à nos clients d'assurer le paiement selon plusieurs échéanciers. Donc, pour qu'ils ne soient pas très affectés par cette pandémie-là. En parallèle, nous avons pris plusieurs dispositions relatives à l'optimisation de nos exploitations. Donc, la qualité du service doit être assurée, mais on doit faire des efforts pour l'optimisation, la rationalisation des dépenses. Aussi, l'État a encouragé les banques à nous aider, nos opérateurs, pour avoir des crédits qui sont adaptés à cette situation. Donc, des taux d'endettement, des taux pour les prêts qui sont très encourageants, avec d'autres conditions relatives aux premiers remboursements qui sont étalés, qui sont reportés et différés sur plusieurs années, ainsi que le délai de paiement de remboursement étalé sur plusieurs années. Mais en priorité, comme j'ai dit, il fallait faire des optimisations sur les investissements, sur les frais d'exploitation aussi, donc pour assurer un équilibre financier par les moyens propres en premier lieu. Donc pour cela, nous avons revu nos projets ou nos programmes d'investissement pour choisir les priorités, ceux qui sont priorités pour les exécuter et ceux qui peuvent être décalés pendant un certain moment, on les a décalés. Mais toujours, comme je le répète, la qualité et la sécurité d'alimentation doivent être assurées. Pour cela, aussi pour encourager nos clients à avoir accès à tous ces services, donc nous avons renforcé tout ce qui est opération digitale. Donc nous avons plusieurs moyens d'être en relation avec nos clients pour la communication, pour les paiements de leurs factures, pour le passage de leurs demandes relatives à leur branchement, etc. Donc nous avons un site web dédié pour cela. Nous avons des applications sur les mobiles. Nous avons tout ce qui est par des banques, des paiements par des cartes bancaires, etc. Et cette pandémie nous a permis de réfléchir sur cette problématique ou bien cette opportunité de renforcer davantage la digitalisation, la numérisation de toutes nos actions. Donc pour cela, nous avons fait un programme qui va nous permettre de renforcer encore plus cette procédure de dématérialisation des procédures de travail, digitalisation des services de la RADEMA, et cela permettra de pallier aux inconvénients qu'auront des pandémies pareilles à celles que nous vivons pour l'instant. Donc jusqu'à aujourd'hui, vu toutes ces dispositions prises, tout ça nous a permis d'avoir une trésorerie qui nous permettra de faire face à toutes ces contraintes-là, mais bien sûr avec un plan de secours qui sera utilisé pour avoir accès à des crédits dans les cas où on aura besoin de cela. Et merci pour tout le monde.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muntasir, for your introduction and your statement. I'd like to hand over now to Milo Fiasconaro, who is from the Acqua Pubblica Europea, as we said. Milo, your perspective from the European utilities, please.
Thanks, Dieter, and thanks to Julian and GWOPA for this invitation. Yeah, thanks a lot. As I was saying, as you were saying, Dieter,
you're muted. Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
You can hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. Then I don't know if there is Dieter with a problem, otherwise I go on. So I was saying, I represent Acqua Pubblica Europea, which is, as Dieter was saying, a network of publicly owned water utilities in Europe. The network brings together more, let's say, a variety of different operators. Operators coming from big capital cities like Paris, Brussels, Milan, but also smaller operators from rural areas, from France, from Spain, and also big regional or even state operators like Irish Water or Scottish Water. And the problem of the impact, the economic impact of COVID on water operators has been one of the issues that we addressed during the pandemic as a part of the activities that we carried out as a support to our members on exchange on how to face actually the different challenges raised by the pandemic. What I can say is, but my first reaction would be that from our perspective, what we see at European level among water utilities is more or less chiming in with what Ms. McKinnon said in terms of the impact on both the revenues and costs, although with a varying degree of intensity. And also chime in with what Ms. McKinnon was saying about one of her conclusion or main outcomes of her work, that is the fact that, at least from a European level, we don't see a major impact on short-term liquidity or major problems on short-term liquidity, but rather our concerns are on a medium-term perspective and related to the structural decrease of revenues. What I can also add is that well, as I was saying, we observed in Europe that the economic impact is varying across territories, across different contexts. These are, of course, expected at the level of a continent. There are two main factors that, from our perspective, can explain this variability in terms of the impact. Quite simply, one is the fact whether an operator is mainly working or covering a urban area or rather a rural area, and the other main variable, the other main explaining factor in terms of the different level of impact is whether an operator is working in industrial and in particular in touristic area. What we observe is that the economic impact, in particular in terms of decreasing level of revenue, is of course higher in cities, and this because basically there is a drop of number of commuting people going to the city to work from suburbs and other rural areas. And indeed, operators that are working more in a rural environment didn't note significant impact on water consumption and consequently on expected revenue. Then if a city is also a touristic city, then of course the impact is much higher. We have, among the data we collected from our members, we have varying level of drop in revenue during the 2 to 3 months of pandemic, that is varying between 10% and 30%. And I would say that the median value is around 50% in terms of loss in revenues related to less consumption. Then, of course, there are also problems related to what Ms. Macchino was mentioning, with the fact that either national governments or economic regulators where they are, or even the operator themselves from the very beginning as a public operator trying to ensure access to all, especially during the pandemic, there's been measure to ease and particularly households in terms of postponement of the payment, of suspension of the billing process, of possibility to for households in particular to pay installments, the water bill. But overall, what our members are saying to us is that these measures are not expected to create a major impact on major problems in terms of liquidity for water operators. So, as I was saying, major concerns relate to the fact that operators expect a quite structural decrease in terms of revenue related to billing from water consumption, both from household use, but above all from economic activity. And again, in touristic areas and in a city area, this will be particularly high, and they expect, yeah, as I was saying, the projection are around a structural decrease at 10%. On investments, yeah, indeed, also our operators have frozen during the pandemic a part of the realization of investments, also because it was not possible. I mean, some of the investment, I mean, the supplier were not able to realize work during the lockdown, during to measure related to containment of the spread of the COVID. What they saw, so what they expect is that there will be some of the investment has been postponed on the next year. But still, for this year, they expect again the median value would be for us around 20% of reduction in terms of the amount of investment planned for this year before the COVID. I will maybe come back later on in a second round of the question about the measures that has been taken or will be taken to address some of the financial problems that we see from water operator side in Europe. What I can already say is that, of course, within European context, there are also discussions going on beyond national level in the context of European Union that is working on significant recovery plan, which will also address the water sector. At the same time, we are, and our members are exchanging a lot with water regulators, economic regulators, where they exist. And this is quite a number of countries in Europe that are also realizing significant impact on the water operators, but also in particularly on households. And the major problem that we expect here is an increasing number of households facing difficulty to pay the water bill due to the economic downturn, the potential long-term economic downturn. And so erasing in a number of people unable to pay the water bill. And this is the major problem we expect, many of our operators are expecting. And so from our perspective, regarding the measure to address cash flow problems, we like to distinguish short-term cash flow problems that might be addressed through especially emergency line, credit line backed up by the national governments or public banks that can help in the short period where there are cash flow problems. But as I said, this regards, at least in our membership, a minority of members, from more structural problem that needs a wider understanding of what is going on economic level on the water sector, even beyond the COVID crisis, that is just exacerbating some of the problems that were already there. Just let me finish on this point regarding Europe. A recent study by the OECD and European Commission on investment needs for the water sector in Europe just before the COVID was published, was estimating for the next decade in Europe an investment need beyond the baseline scenario, so beyond what is spent now, of more than 400 billion euros at the European level for the next decade. So on top of what is spent now. So more structural reform on the way water services are financed need to be taken into account, also to address the COVID. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Milo, for that European perspective and very interesting statements and findings concerning short-term and structural problems. So thanks for that. I'd like to hand over the floor to Valeria Suarez from Latin America, from the Water Operator Partnership, LAC, to give the perspective from their member companies, member utilities on the impact of COVID-19 on the financial side. Valeria, the floor is yours for the next few minutes.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Buenos días. Mi nombre es Valeria Suárez. Desde Buenos Aires me ocupo de la coordinación de la plataforma regional GWOPA. En esta presentación, bueno, primero quisiera agradecer a Julie y a GWOPA por la invitación a participar en este webinar. Y voy a comentarles un poco cuál es la situación y qué es lo que nos han transmitido los operadores miembros de la plataforma, que son alrededor de 100, de diversos tamaños, desde grandes operadores de grandes ciudades de Latinoamérica, como pueden ser Buenos Aires o San Pablo, hasta pequeñas asociaciones comunitarias y asociaciones rurales. ¿Cuáles han sido sus impresiones y sus dificultades enfrentando la pandemia de COVID y la liquidez? Bueno, lo primero que se destaca en la región, por supuesto, son las consecuencias inciertas a nivel liquidez que va a tener, y a nivel económico en general, que va a tener esta pandemia, y también al mismo tiempo la priorización de brindar el servicio y de garantizar el servicio por parte de los operadores, dada la importancia de la higiene y del agua que se ha visto mostrada y aumentada con esta crisis sanitaria. Por supuesto, como han dicho ya los colegas que han hablado, se observó, por empezar, un aumento de los costos. Esto proviene de varios factores. el aumento de la necesidad de distribuir agua segura a parte de la población no conectada, ya sean camiones cisternas, en bidones y demás. La necesidad de contar con equipamiento de seguridad para aquellos trabajadores que trabajan en la línea de frente, en las cuadrillas técnicas. También la necesidad de incorporar tecnología para asegurar el teletrabajo para aquellos empleados que se quedaban en casa trabajando en la parte administrativa. Y la necesidad de aumentar el stock de insumos químicos críticos por una cuestión de seguridad para poder garantizar el servicio aún en tiempos de aislamiento o de cuarentena. A su vez, este aumento de costos se vio enfrentado a una disminución de ingresos traída por distintos factores, dificultades económicas de la población, por supuesto, pero también por el cierre de las oficinas de cobranza. Parte de la población en Latinoamérica, una buena parte no está bancarizada, y el cierre de las oficinas de cobranza debido al aislamiento y a la cuarentena dificultó los pagos y la recaudación de la facturación. Todo esto enmarcado en distintas medidas tomadas por los gobiernos de la región, medidas que afectaron directamente a los operadores, como la suspensión de cortes de servicio, el pedido de reconexión inmediata a los hogares que habían sido desconectados por falta de pago, por supuesto, suspensión de cualquier tipo de aumento o de adecuación de tarifa que estuviera prevista en los planes de los operadores. A su vez también las medidas fundamentalmente las medidas de aislamiento preventivo y de cuarentena que todavía duran parcialmente en algunos de los países o en muchos de ellos, porque estamos en un momento todavía importante de crisis sanitaria aquí en la región, han llevado a la dificultad, por el cierre de las oficinas comerciales, la dificultad de las personas en poder acercarse y pagar su factura para todos aquellos que no podían hacerlo de manera electrónica. Si bien esta baja de ingresos y estas dificultades económicas se vieron un poquito, digamos, ayudadas o subsanadas por cierto nivel de subsidios a las familias dadas por distintos gobiernos de la región, en algunos pocos casos subsidios directos relacionados con el consumo del agua, todavía estas dificultades persisten. Así es como los ingresos por recaudación han variado según los operadores, por supuesto, y según la ubicación geográfica de los mismos, pero en los meses de mayo y junio, de acuerdo a un relevamiento que hicimos conjuntamente entre GWOPA y el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, los operadores nos transmitieron que sus ingresos han variado entre el 16 al 93% del ingreso habitual correspondiente a su facturación en tiempo fuera de la pandemia. Como podrán ver, la variación es enorme y esto depende muchísimo de cada operador y de los clientes a quienes sirven. Por supuesto, los operadores de la región están haciendo su mayor esfuerzo para garantizar el servicio y para garantizar la seguridad de sus empleados. Y por ahora han logrado adaptarse con bastante rapidez a esta nueva situación y sortear los obstáculos, al menos en el corto plazo, para poder seguir trabajando. A nivel también de medición del impacto, la región, el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo está trabajando en un modelo para poder medir el impacto que el COVID está teniendo sobre el cash flow de los operadores. Este modelo está por ahora en prueba piloto y en breve estará disponible para los operadores de la región. ¿Qué se está haciendo en este momento para poder sortear los obstáculos que se presentan como desafíos para los operadores en materia de cash flow? Por supuesto, como ya han dicho también antes mis colegas, se están postergando inversiones. Esto permitirá mejorar la situación en el corto plazo, pero por supuesto sabemos que afecta al futuro en una región que necesita de inversiones para expandir el servicio y para llevar agua segura y saneamiento a todos los habitantes. Se ha trabajado mucho en planes de pago, en acordar con los clientes, sobre todo aquellos clientes residenciales, pagos en cuotas a la medida de lo que pudieran ellos pagar para poder cumplir con la factura del agua. También se multiplicaron los canales de pago en América Latina. Como les dije antes, hay mucha gente que no está bancarizada y los operadores han hecho un gran esfuerzo para difundir medidas alternativas de pago frente al cierre de oficinas comerciales, tanto en todos los medios de información, pagos virtuales y demás. Ha tenido también bastante importancia en la ayuda para mantener la recaudación, el sistema de facturación in situ que algunos operadores desarrollan, y por supuesto aquellos que pudieron tomar medidas de seguridad apropiadas con anticipación y pudieron mantener esta facturación in situ con la presencia de sus empleados, han logrado mejores resultados que aquellos que, sin poder movilizar a la gente para la lectura de medidores, debieron facturar sobre bases de promedio y no sobre bases de consumo. Frente a todo esto, los operadores de la región entienden que van a necesitar de varias medidas para poder trabajar en la pospandemia. La primera es mejorar la eficiencia con la incorporación de tecnología para toda la gestión de la empresa y para la mejora de la manera de trabajar tanto a nivel comercial como a nivel técnico. La tecnología es un componente fundamental para mejorar la eficiencia y para ayudar a transitar mejor la pospandemia. También deberán implementarse medidas de austeridad, priorizar las inversiones que mejoren el sistema y reprogramar otras que no sean vistas como tan urgentes y necesarias. A su vez, la cooperación con otros operadores se ha visto muy relevante en este periodo para ver cómo la pandemia estaba impactando y qué habían hecho otros frente a problemas similares. Y finalmente se estima que va a acrecentarse el pedido de ayuda a gobiernos y a la banca internacional, que sabemos que está disponiendo de medidas para colaborar y contribuir con los operadores y el mantenimiento de su cash flow. Muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you very much, Valeria, for your input and perspective from Latin America. And I'd like to directly hand over to Jonathan Capata from Lusaka, with his perspective from Lusaka. You have been with us already in another setting, in another webinar. So I'm interested to hear what has changed maybe also between March and now, what new insights you got in terms of the impact of COVID-19 and your possible solutions to deal with the financial issues of COVID-19 in Lusaka. Mr. Campata, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are joining us from. As has been introduced, Jonathan Campata, Managing Director of Lusaka Water Supply and Sanitation Company Limited. With regards to the COVID-19 pandemic, once it was declared in Zambia here in March, I think as a utility, we quickly went into putting up in place a COVID response plan. And basically, we're looking at the key elements in terms of the health and safety of our employees, as well as that of our customers, ensuring that there's continuity in service, the delivery, safeguarding our assets, as well as the financial base. So these are some of the key elements which we looked at. And immediately in March, when it was declared, the impact was felt, but it was declared on 19th March, which is just after we have done our billing. And there was a declaration by the government that we should not disconnect customers. And we saw from that declaration actually that the customers held back. Most of them began not to pay their bills. So March, April, May, June, we've been seeing a continued decline in terms of our revenue. The lowest was in May, where the revenue declined by 46%. We picked up in June. The decline was 42%. I think the picking up has been due to massive campaigns, which we've put in place, which is one of the activities in our COVID response plan, whereby we are encouraging our customers that despite the directive not to disconnect, they have a duty to pay their bills if they expect the service to be sustainable. We also took advantage of the various electronic platforms which are available, the mobile payment platforms with the banks as well, to come up with these agreements to encourage customers to pay electronically so that they don't have to come to our offices. So we see that I think this initiative has actually, in terms of the impact really on the liquidity, it has been there such that it does not allow us really to stock chemicals. So we're not being able to buy chemicals. With our partners again and through the government, we have been engaging that we have this support not only for our utility but also other utilities in Zambia. And I think there's some support which is coming through UNICEF and the German government to provide at least 3 months cover. So this is also going to help us ease our liquidity. The impact has also been on our inability now to pay our obligations, particularly the taxes. We saw that we've been able to pay our taxes for the pay-as-you-earn, as well as other obligations, probably before the COVID-19. But the sudden reduction made it that we're having these charges to pay our taxes. So again, we're in discussion with the government to come up with some payment swaps, as well as to defer any penalties that we might suffer due to our inability to timely pay some of the taxes. The other issue has actually been on the operation and maintenance in terms of our infrastructure, because we need to do the routine maintenance, and we've seen that we're actually deferring some of the maintenance works which we should have ordinarily undertaken prior to the COVID because of the difficulties in liquidity. So we see this as a deferred, because if we defer some of the critical maintenance, this will come and haunt us. It will become a problem in future. So we're ensuring that we do as much of the critical maintenance within the limited resources. The COVID also brought about general economic downturn. We saw depreciation of our currency. And given that we import most of our chemicals and some of the key materials, we saw that added need to have additional resources. Supply chain disruptions were also there in terms of the borders being closed. This is getting a bit better now, but we still have those restrictions. When it comes to debt servicing, we do have some obligations with our local banks, but again, through the government, the banks have actually relaxed in terms of the payment terms. So as we've also negotiated with the banks in terms of paying some of our obligations, we're also calling upon our customers, those who cannot actually pay, to come and have some agreements so that they can pay whatever they can afford. Our message is that it's better to pay a little than not to pay anything as well. We've also been active in terms of engaging our partners, different partners. We have had the partners virtual conference a few weeks ago, whereby we did outline to our partners some of the gaps which we actually have in terms of financing our COVID response plan. Partners have come on board, particularly those who we are already working with. We do have partners like African Development Bank and the World Bank. We have ongoing projects. So within the ongoing projects, they've been able to restructure and make available some financing, particularly to support the additional costs for the PPEs for our staff. This includes also the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We're working with the GIZ on a comprehensive program to support advocacy, PPEs, tankard water in some of the areas in Lusaka, which are stressed and the need for this commodity, as well as putting up rehabilitation works in some small area in the peri-urban areas, low-income areas particularly, which actually require this support to ensure that we deliver safe water to these areas. So basically, I think that's a quick perspective in terms of where we are now. Liquidity has we've been hit a lot in terms of the decline now in our collections. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan, for that perspective from Lusaka. So, so we have went around the globe, I would like to say. So, and we have also a number of questions which have now been put forward from the audience to a number of the panelists and also the keynote speaker. So I'd like to engage now all of you in answering these questions. Some of the questions are directly targeted to a specific person. Others maybe I'd like to share with all of you and get your perspective. So the first one is going to Midori, so towards the World Bank. So it's Peter Macy asking about a similar financial facility, which was set up after the Indian Ocean tsunami. And it was a facility capitalized at over 1 billion. And the question is, could we replicate that model, improving maybe a COVID-19 facility, which takes lessons learned from the experience of the Indian Ocean tsunami facility into account? So maybe Midori, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, absolutely. We are looking for experience from any other pandemic or disasters to incorporate in the setting up of a facility. But we're not, in the presentation that I just made, the tool that we prepared was not, it was not the intention to prepare the global facility. It was more some kind of a guidance tool for each country or the governments or regions to implement. So, and the reason we did it that way is because of the scale of the pandemic. It's just everywhere, right? It's not like one disaster that struck in one part of the region. This is so widespread. The needs are so enormous. And it's also, it also varies, right? The need, as many of the speakers noted, there's a lot of variety of the scale of the impact, and it depends on the local context, how it's been here, and also how the governments and their policies have differed, depending on the country. So that's part of the reason we were targeting to provide generic principles rather than a global facility. But by all means, any lessons that you can learn from other pandemic facilities, definitely we're welcome to receive those to incorporate in our advice to our clients. Thank you.
Then I have another question, which is going also to Midori and the panelists, which is from Michel and Gasson. beyond emergency responses to the current pandemic, what are your recommendations towards building stronger resilience for water utilities vis-a-vis crises of similar magnitude going forward? So what can we do to learn from where we are right now in order to be more resilient in the future and better prepared maybe for future crises like what we are facing now? So maybe can we start, maybe Jonathan first, from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. For utility companies, I think it's very good to have enterprise risk management procedures in place. I think for us that came handy for us to react quickly. But beyond that, now we are looking at having a comprehensive business continuity plan in place, because the COVID-19 is only one of the catastrophes that we may face. And anything else can come next. So we really have to be prepared for these eventualities. Then thirdly, I think utilities need to have a very good cash flows, so that they can be able to actually have stockpiles of essential materials in place, because our business requires a lot of inputs. And we're also looking at now at the energy side. It has not been a big problem now, but I think the opportunity is also to really start to invest in the renewable energy, because to power our facilities would require energy, and just relying on a single source, I think it's a big risk. So we're also looking now to go into renewable energy to ensure that our operations are not disrupted also on that front. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe can I pass this on also to Milo from the European perspective? So what are there any discussions already taking place now in order to looking to the future? How can we actually get better prepared for similar cases in the future?
Well, thanks to you, to the participant for the question. Actually, indeed, we recently been working on a short publication in partnership with the GWOPA, by the way, on the lesson learned from this pandemic, from good practices that our members carried out, but also some mistakes that were made. And basically, in terms of lesson learned, indeed, and the conclusion in how to increase resilience for the future. First point, we absolutely agree on this with Jonathan, is the issue of risk management plan, which is not just an issue of having a good plan, but how, but more importantly, at least what the operators have pointed out after the pandemic, making this plan part of the real life of the operator. I mean, integrating this in the everyday operation. It's a change of culture within the operator. It's not just a matter of having a written plan, a written document, but it's a change in culture. And this comes to the second point about increasing resilience, which emerged as important from the pandemic time, which is the engagement of employees. I mean, how employees are engaged in decision making of the operators, because when, for example, there was in Europe, we had to rush from business as normal to remote working. This had to be done in very short time with disruptive change of the organization. So only through the employment of only through a participation and commitment of the employees was possible. Third point, we would conclude in terms of resilience, again, on the topic of this today's seminar, which is the financing model. I mean, I would like to reiterate this point, the fact that we need in the future to think an evolving model of financing, maybe for water utilities, at least a model where the cost recovery is not just based on households. Otherwise, and the pandemic has proved, we cannot ensure universal coverage and universal access to water. We need to think, to explore alternative models, also to finance, through a greater maybe involvement of financier and financial actors, but not only. I mean, there are other source of revenue need to be found in other sector. So these are maybe three main lessons that we learned from the pandemic.
Okay, thank you very much, Milo. Maybe just a quick announcement. So we have reached 3 o'clock. What we would propose is that we go until 3:15, so that we have another roughly 15 minutes to also discuss the questions which have been put forward. Then we can come to an end around 3:15. So having said that, maybe I pass that. I have another question actually dealing with WOPs, and that's from Carlos Enrique Diaz. Do you think WOPs have any role to play in elevating the financial impact of COVID in water operators, and how this could be done? And maybe, well, of course, obviously this is a question which is immediately targeted also to Valeria, having her experience with WOPs in Latin America. So maybe I'll address this first to you, Valeria, to see what kind of water operator partnerships, how can they actually play a role in COVID-19?
Muchas gracias. Sí, seguramente los WOPs tengan un rol importante que jugar, por lo menos en Latinoamérica y seguramente en el resto del mundo también, para tratar de mejorar la posición de los operadores frente a los desafíos que se plantean. Nosotros en la región, o los operadores de la región, entienden que va a haber distintas necesidades de acuerdo a lo que aprendimos de esta pandemia, distintas necesidades para el futuro, entre las cuales, como ya se mencionó, tener buenos y nuevos y buenos planes de gestión y planes de contingencia que permitan enfrentar posibles nuevas dificultades de manera inmediata y eficiente. Y también, como dije antes, el tema de equipamiento tecnológico actualizado para las empresas va a ser fundamental para enfrentar nuevos desafíos. Creo que ambas cosas seguramente ya estarán incorporadas, o siendo incorporadas, o ya estarán incorporadas por distintos operadores de la región en mayor o menor medida, y seguramente ellos serán los indicados para actuar como mentores en distintos WOPs para ayudar a aquellos que todavía necesitan dar un paso más adelante. Así que sí, seguramente los WOPs tengan un rol importante para ayudar a quienes necesitan incorporar buenas prácticas para enfrentar los desafíos futuros.
Okay, thank you very much, Valeria. I have a question by Pauline Macaria. She asked Mr. Campata, so Jonathan, but I think this can also be posed to Mr. Salahuddin to Muntasir from Marrakesh. And the question is, I would like to ask Mr. Campata whether in terms of reducing operational cost, the pandemic has provided a need to restructure the workforce in order to reduce the labor costs for water utilities. So impact on workforce and labor costs. Maybe you can give us a hint on that, Jonathan, but then also Mr. Muntasir, also from a perspective from Marrakesh, would be interesting.
I can go first. Okay. Yes. Yeah. In terms of actual restructuring, we are actually taking the opportunity of this period actually to look at our whole operational structure, so that we see really what's the most efficient way to deliver our services. And we have seen reduction in labor force, not because of the COVID, but because of reduced activities. Because we do have some short-term contract employees because of maybe projects, some works we are doing, and we've seen that reduction in that angle. But also we have made proposals to reduce on some of our personnel costs. This is a discussion we're having with the employees, because some of these actually hinge on conditions of service, and we wouldn't want to make unilateral reduction in some of the pecs. But we're having this discussion with our employees. I mean, having an open discussion with them. This is the position in terms of the revenues. So we want to make some short-term cuts in some of the entitlements. We've also drastically reduced, like on issues like overtime. This is more administrative arrangements we've put in place to reduce some of the operating costs that do with the staff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan. Muntasir, maybe some experience from your side with regarding to any impact on the structure of your labor and the labor costs in the COVID-19 crisis?
Par rapport à notre cas, nous sommes une entreprise étatique, ce n'est pas une entreprise privée. Donc, pour les dispositions qu'on a prises pour notre personnel, c'est que d'abord, on a priorisé sa santé, les conditions de travail, mais par rapport aux dépenses, aux salaires, etc., ça a été préservé. Par rapport aux frais d'exploitation, pour tout ce qui est déplacement à l'extérieur, etc., ça a été minimisé suite à cette pandémie. Entre-temps, il y avait des gains à faire par rapport aux frais d'exploitation de la régie. Donc, ça a concerné surtout donc, des diminutions d'achat, des diminutions d'achat de fournitures d'eau, d'électricité, en plus du matériel utilisé. Aussi, il y avait des entreprises qui ont été obligées d'arrêter leurs travaux de maintenance suite au confinement, donc aux interdictions de déplacement entre les différentes villes dans notre pays. Donc, ça a permis aussi d'avoir des optimisations sur les frais d'exploitation. Mais aussi, donc, pour le personnel, donc, nous n'avons pas disons, des discussions de réduction de personnel, etc., mais surtout des optimisations sur les frais d'exploitation. Merci.
Okay, thank you very much for that input. We've got another question from Simone Klauwitter, and I think this is addressed towards the World Bank, so Midori. While the World Bank initiative is highly appreciated, the scale of the COVID-19 will also ask for a self-help capacity of the utility. And that includes affordability programming, as had been described by Radima and Muntasir, payment options. So the various payment options in order to take care of affordability issues. In the facility you have described, or in the outline for facility you have described, do you see that there's anything which can be integrated in there? Is there coordinated support from the World Bank or from other donors to deal with affordability issues for utilities and their customers?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. I've been, listening very with very much curiosity to hear from all the speakers, because there have been a lot of great affordability programs seem to be implemented around the world. So yeah, definitely I would be happy to, collect all the lessons and to have some more of integrated or consolidated, a more comprehensive advice that we could provide to our clients. But at this stage, yeah, I'm more of a listening mode to see how these different creative options could be are being implemented around the world, and so that we could take global stock of that experience and to disseminate such knowledge and experience to the other utilities in need to implement them. So that would be my view. But in terms of that particular facility, you will recall my last slide where we had the country level fund flows, and there are different ways to alleviate that affordability concerns for the consumers. We were talking more about the utility perspective, but we also should keep in mind how the government through other means would provide that subsidies or other cash transfers and other methods to alleviate the affordability concerns for the consumers. So again, as I said, the holistic view will be important, for the government to plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And maybe then just a quick question to Milo from the European perspective. Are there discussions on the question of affordability and how to deal with affordability within the utilities and maybe on national level?
Thanks. Well, I could talk about this topic for hours. As an organization, we have been working quite a lot on the issue in the last years. I try to be short. Overall, we think indeed, as an organization, we believe that affordability problems are better addressed through general welfare measures. So where is the country, the state that is supporting users to pay the water bills? The point is, what do we do when these measures are not there? And in European context, our members as a public operators, where these measures are not available, I've been trying to work on specific instruments to help households in needs. For example, Water Solidarity Fund that is financed through the overall water bills and so on. So there are different measures that have been carried out. The affordability issue is indeed a problem. Again, the recent study I was mentioning about from the OECD is showing very clear that even in Europe, there are, especially in Eastern Europe, there are significant problems with affordability. So overall, to conclude, there are different instruments that can be put in place to ensure cost recovery while ensuring also affordability. In general, it's better address affordability from general welfare measure. Point is that the solution needs to be found also where these measures are not there. Overall, again, problems, I mean, we cannot expect, especially, I would say, in less well-off countries, that the cost recovery is ensured just through household contribution. I mean, the role of the industry, the role of the polluters, the role of land developers needs to be taken into account to have a more balanced, a fairer contribution to the water costs.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I've got, well, we don't have much time anymore, but maybe two questions with quick answers from Moban Malare, maybe to Jonathan and also to Valeria. Do you believe COVID-19 improved water supply to low-income areas that would normally be excluded or cut off due to the commercial operating nature of the utilities? What do you think is the best way to balance making water available for these areas, washing of hands because of the pandemic, and the financial viability of utilities? How to go forward? How do we balance these two targets in the area at time of crisis? Maybe.
Yes, that's a very good question. It's a yes and a no. A yes in that some of the low-income areas, they're unplanned, so it's very difficult to put in permanent infrastructure. So we are now reacting from a humanitarian point of view. So as indicated, that we need to work closely now with the town planning authorities to get a permanent solution. Some of these low-income areas that are actually unplanned. So some of these areas, that's where we've put some of our tanks in terms of the tankard service. But it goes beyond the COVID-19 so to do about having access for healthy living. So it's beyond the COVID-19. It's to do with the universal access to water, and the limitation in some of these poor and planned areas is their legal nature. So we need to legalize these areas, have them well planned, and ensure that a sustainable service is actually delivered to these areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Valeria, just quickly.
Sí, Bueno, por supuesto, en este momento los operadores de la región han hecho su mayor esfuerzo para poder llevar agua segura a aquellos que no estaban conectados, aquellas áreas que no estaban conectadas. Pero estas han sido medidas de emergencia y entonces el agua, por supuesto, llegó mediante distintos sistemas de emergencia otra vez. Carros tanques, bidones, no se ha conectado población en poquísimos meses. Entonces, este es un tema pendiente que va a ser un desafío frente a la necesidad de postergar inversiones debido a los bajos ingresos que se están teniendo. Ahora, a su vez se cuenta con que esta pandemia haya visibilizado tanto la necesidad de llevar agua segura y saneamiento a la población, que haga que los gobiernos de la región puedan priorizar este sector viendo la necesidad y den más ayuda a los operadores y prioricen inversiones para que esta expansión del servicio y llevar el agua bajo la forma de conexiones y de redes se pueda hacer lo más rápido posible. Gracias.
Okay, thank you very much. Then the last question, maybe I combine two of the questions. Actually, one I would have had myself as well. The question is, in this pandemic scenario, how do you think a corporation should move its customers to digital payment channels to be able to contribute to its bottom line and remain financially liquid? So the importance of digital payment channels, but then also on a different perspective is overall digital transformation and how this will be helping utilities to build resiliency and resilience in terms of the future risks. So digital transformation, digital payment channels, how can this be used by utilities to get more resilient? Maybe I'll start with Milo, maybe first from the European perspective, and then I would like to ask Muntasir from your experience also in Marrakesh.
Well, again, I mean, when talking about the digitalization, this is a challenge that all operators are facing, including Europe. Of course, again, with differences across operators, especially in terms of size. I mean, bigger operators are better placed. But let me make you an example of what this can imply. For example, in terms of payment. One of the operators that reported more acute drop in revenue was an operator from Spain who was saying, unfortunately, a lot of our users, a lot of our customers are not paying by bank transfer, but by the post, through the post, physically, coming to the post office, and with the lockdown, posts were closed, so they didn't come, so they didn't pay. So indeed, this was a clear example that lack of digitalization also contributed to a drop in revenue. On the internal organization side, I can say that while among our members, all operators succeeded in moving quickly all operation from remote, although they struggled. Some of them struggled. They were not prepared. Even big operators were not completely prepared, which shows that I mean, this push a transformation, accelerated the transformation that maybe was already there, was coming, but the pandemic has gave a strong push, and the implication of this transformation are something to be studied in the future, something we are working on and analyzing, because the impact on the internal organization of operator that this transformation, digitalization is going to have in the medium term, we expect is going to be huge.
Okay, thank you very much, Milo. And then maybe the perspective from Radima.
Oui. Si vous permettez. Donc, pour la digitalisation ou la numérisation des services, donc, à mon avis, il y a plusieurs volets. Donc, pour le volet, comme ça a été indiqué, pour le paiement par les clients, Donc, nous avons plusieurs créneaux, plusieurs possibilités à travers les smartphones, à travers les banques, à travers le site de notre régie, etc., des points de vente. Donc, pour l'instant, nous sommes à peu près 60% de transactions qui se font par ces canaux-là. Mais pour moi, je parle de digitalisation, c'est surtout les procédures de travail des opérateurs. Donc, ça permettra de faire face à cette pandémie, d'autres pandémies aussi qui surviendront dans l'avenir, on ne sait jamais. Donc, ça permettra aussi aux clients, à part les paiements, de faire leurs demandes de branchement, le suivi de leurs projets, etc. Tout ça à travers des plateformes digitalisées. Cette digitalisation aussi, ça permettra à tous nos collaborateurs, dans des cas où on sera obligé de travailler à distance, d'avoir des plateformes pour le télétravail, et donc ça permettra de sécuriser pas mal d'interventions des opérateurs dans ce domaine. Aussi, je parle de la technologie digitalisée concernant la gestion des ouvrages, donc d'eau potable, d'assainissement, d'électricité. Donc, de tout ce qui est système de supervision, ça permettra aussi des interventions sur les réseaux, d'avoir de tous les renseignements relatifs au trajet de l'eau, depuis les réservoirs jusqu'au dernier client. Tout cela est supervisé par des systèmes de supervision qui permettront d'avoir une qualité de service accrue. Et merci.
Okay, thank you very much, Muntasir. And I see that there are still questions coming in. However, considering the time, I would propose that these questions, which we're also dealing with, how can we make sure that the finances which will be made available, for example, from donors from outside, how they can be used with a proper capacity in the best way and quickly within the country. How can the finances be absorbed? Such questions I would like to propose to have that answered maybe then later on bilaterally on the platform, because we are running already late, or very late actually. So therefore, let me first thank you in the audience, thank you as the panelist and also the keynote from the World Bank for being a part of that discussion and for putting forward these interesting questions. As some takeaway messages and some closing remarks from my side before I hand over to Julie, I would like to stress that while of course we see that the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted on the short term already the water utilities, financial capacities, we are still we'll be facing on the medium term maybe even more difficulties when we see that the investments have been postponed, that the full impact of the economic downturn is maybe not yet has not yet arrived in all countries and therefore not in all utilities. Also, when we see what has been mentioned by the European participant, that the tourism sites, for example, where major impacts have been felt, of course, as well, that these kind of shortcomings and reductions are still not yet there in the balance sheets and the financial calculations of the utilities. So that's one thing. The second thing then for me, which I found very interesting, is just a discussion at the end of the whole question of digitalization. That this is something where even the large utilities in Europe have not been fully prepared, and while utilities in Marrakesh, also I know in Lusaka, have quickly responded also with regard to digital payment options and so on, in order to help alleviate these kind of challenges. So that was the digitalization is playing a key role in the response to COVID, but also in the future will play a key role in becoming better prepared to get more resilient to such kind of crisis management in the future. And then one important note from my side, also the business continuity plans, which would need to be integrated in the corporate culture. So basically, it's not enough to have plans on paper, but in order to be better prepared for future crises, that these business continuity plans need to be properly incorporated in the different structures, the different levels in the company, and be part of the corporate culture in that company. With regard to the World Bank tool, I think this is an excellent tool which can offer great support for utilities, especially in times of the crisis, in order to quickly calculate the magnitude of impact and then come forward with that towards, for example, other donors or development partners to discuss the crisis and the impacts. Political dialogue, I think, is important not only on global level, but actually also within the local decision maker structure. So to be able to better understand the problems and then all the potential solutions, which also are quite often political solutions for the utilities, to make them fit the local context and the challenges of these utilities. So this would be some of the findings I would put in a summary. However, of course, the full summary and the full documented note of that webinar will be made available beginning of early next week on the GWOPA website. So that's I think what I can do right now. I'm very happy to have been part of that discussion, and I'd like to hand over now to Julie for some final words from GWOPA as the host for that session.
Thank you so much, Dieter, for leading this really engaging discussion and for that expert summary there, where you highlighted some really important points. And you've thanked everyone, but thanks once again to all of the panelists, especially our keynote as well, Midori and Makino from the World Bank. Most interesting and useful. Already a lot of interest expressed for the tools that you've shared. And a special thanks to our GIZ colleague Hannah Schwartzendruber, whose name I finally can pronounce, and GWOPA team members who've been very helpful behind the scenes, and our interpreters, of course, who always do a really excellent job. Finally, BMZ, our donor, who is we're very grateful to have supporting this program. As you know, as Dieter has said, we're trying to keep this conversation going, and we have various ways that we're trying to do that, especially in this time when the WOPs that we are usually promoting is prohibiting travel, can't carry on in the same way because of travel prohibitions and so on. So we're trying to make use more of online tools to facilitate exchange during this time. So we have a campaign that I won't get into very much, but if you can find out more about on our website. This webinar today was part of a series, and as Dieter has mentioned, you can go to our site and find out see the videos of previous episodes, in addition to reading outcome notes of those. And the outcome note and video of this will also be available, as Dieter has mentioned, on the site next week. And finally, on Workplace, we invite you to go to Workplace. There's been information shared about this in the chat box. And there's more on the screen, also more on our site, in case if you haven't had time to write all of this down. If you'd like to join in at this, it's an online sort of social media kind of platform amongst the participants here, where we will be sharing documents about this, and also linked documents. Several things have been requested, and they will be available through that site. There we will post the unanswered questions from today, things that we haven't had an opportunity to get to, and we're inviting the panelists and of course all participants to join on and to answer the questions that have not yet been answered, and to also offer their own experience on things. It's just it's an open space for that. And also there you can find a dialogue that has related to previous webinars that we've had. So on that note, thank you so much, everyone, once again, and have a lovely Tuesday.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.